Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Random Trek. This is Commander Brennan Marr. Star Trek is about hope. Star Trek is about a hopeful future in which we, as human beings, lay down our differences and learn to work together for the betterment of humanity, the betterment for the world, and even the betterment of the galaxy. It's very easy for us nowadays, in our very narrow-minded and myopic view of the world, to think that that day will never come. It's very easy to fall into the trap of believing that we cannot improve, that we cannot be better, that things won't change. Star Trek is all about the hope of the future. I believe that the most dangerous thing we can do is to think there's no hope. There is nothing more dangerous than giving into despair. The news, social media, makes things seem as if there's no hope. But as we discuss Star Trek, let us consider that the future is bright. It'll be a hard, long road. I believe we're going to get there. So join us to have a good time on this great episode of Random Trek with our special guest, and consider Star Trek is about a hopeful future, a future that we need to believe in. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Good afternoon and good morning and welcome to a very special episode of Random Trek. As always, I am Captain Christopher Ingle, and I am joined by my first officer, the man who keeps the transporter from turning me into a little child, Brennan, the mystical Marr. Brennan, how you doing today?
There's been another holodeck malfunction.
Holodeck? Oh, it just all ends. But we are not alone today. No, sir. We needed to bring in a specialist because today we are taking a look at Star Trek, the motion picture, or as some call it, the slow motion picture. We needed someone who knows their material, and we decided to bring in a Rear Admiral, a guy who knows all about Star Trek. You might know him from the Cinephiles and the Enterprise Incident podcast with Scott Mantz. Everyone, welcome Rear Admiral Steve Morris. Steve, how you doing?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and I appreciate your giving me the rank of Rear Admiral. That's a nice one. Thank you.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I don't think Brennan would disagree.
I would give him a full Admiral. But that's
Full Admiral?
I was wondering about that, but I'll take Rear Admiral. There's always room for promotion in the Federation, so we'll see.
Well, I figured in honor of Kirk, who can't decide what he wants to be, we'll put you on the same level as Kirk. I know how much you love Kirk.
I do like the man. Although not necessarily as much in this movie, because in this movie, he's a bit of a jerk.
It can be, but
Yeah.
as I told Brennan, as I watch this, I start to like this movie more and more and more every time I watch it. And it gets higher and higher on my list. But first off, Steve, I why don't you give the fans a little idea here? The fans know how much Brennan and I love Star Trek. What does Star Trek mean to you?
It's funny. It took me, I always watched it, and I have no memory of when I first saw it. It was sometime in the early 70s, flipping channels in the San Francisco Bay Area, and there it was. And it's just always been there and always was destination television. So if I was coming home from school or before going to Little League or a Boy Scout meeting or something like that, if Star Trek was on, I was going to sit and watch it. And I watched it over and over again. But it wasn't until I was probably in my 30s or even in my 40s that I realized just how formative it is. I think Star Trek for me is one of the 3 or 4 most important influences in terms of how I look at the world, in terms of morality, in terms of, you know, thinking through things, how you view people that are different from you, how you want to explore the world, how you want to deal with other people, a sense of justice. So much of that in my life came from Star Trek. And then I had this other epiphany when I really started doing the podcast on Star Trek, was I went, oh, I actually think, because I'm a filmmaker and a screenwriter and a director, and I actually think my storytelling, the way I think story structure works, a lot of that actually was learned from watching Star Trek as well. It's really, really big in my life.
I agree with you. It's huge in my life. I'm obviously a lot, Brennan and I are a lot younger, but I remember my days of watching TNG with my father in the early 90s. That's when I earliest remember it. In fact, I remember we went on a family road trip to Indiana from California. And the day we left was the day that the finale for TNG was going to happen. And I cried because I was going to miss the finale and not know what happened to Captain Picard.
Understandable.
Yeah, so Star Trek has always been an insight to me too in life, and I agree with you 100%. It's formed not only my love of film and cinema and science fiction, but just a general positive outcome. So it's amazing and great to see other people who have that same love. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. But let's get down to the meat and potatoes. That is Star Trek, the motion picture, coming out in 1979 off of the heels of another star franchise that we don't talk about near enough in here. Definitely probably felt the pressure.
What was that one? I don't think I've ever heard of that one.
A little film. I don't know. It won a couple of awards, maybe. I don't know. But,
A Star is Born. Sure, Barbara Streisand.
Yes,
That's a great.
absolutely.
Yeah, no, that was a really strong.
Evergreen. Great song.
Oh no, Star 80. No, Star 80 is the next year. It's a different one. I'm sure there are other Star ones.
Star Crash. It's Star Crash, clearly.
There you go.
But this does something that is very interesting in that it comes out a decade after the original series ends. And it's interesting when you look at today how we have movies that are rebooted or sequels that are coming decade or decades after the original love or the original show or whatever the original material was. And this was kind of one of those first that really came across. So I want to go to you, Steve, first. I hear that you actually saw this in its heyday on the big screen. What were your initial responses to that?
Absolutely. Not only did I see it, I mean, much like you having to being forced to leave before you could see the finale of Next Generation, I watched Star Trek with my family, and there was no question that I wouldn't be lined up on opening night at the Cinema One in Larkspur, California, to go see Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I had seen Superman the movie in the same theater a year before. It was. And the thing too, so I was 11 years old at the time, or probably almost about to turn 11, and it blew my mind because you go from the images of the original series, which, you know, was not a lot of money show in the mid 60s, to seeing what was among the most expensive movies ever made at that time, and I just was blown back into my seat by the scale of it, the effects of it. I mean, I absolutely, as a 10-year-old kid, adored it. Later on, maybe in later viewings, the cracks really started to show, but no, it absolutely blew me away when I first saw it.
Brennan, what about you? What were your initial thoughts of a motion picture?
I saw the Star Trek movie so out of order, you cannot believe. I think I saw Star Trek 4, and then 6, and then 2, then 3, then 5, then the motion picture. When I
wait, hold on. 4, 6, 3, 5, and then the motion picture?
Well, 4, 6, 3, 2, 4, 6, 2, 3, 5.
That is a weird order.
Yeah.
Well done.
I had no idea why, but it took me a long time to watch the motion picture. And when I did, I thought, okay, this is kind of an intriguing story. I initially thought it was very much a kind of going for more of the slow, ponderous approach to sci-fi. I was not as familiar with the original series at the time. all I knew of Star Trek was from the movies and from Next Generation, but I think that I don't really recall this movie making that big of an impression on me the first time I saw it.
Yeah, for me, this is the same way to where TNG was my gateway, my entry into it, and then
Yeah.
Voyager. My dad didn't let me stay up to watch DS9. Still don't know why, but we'll figure that out someday. But I remember I would watch TNG and be introduced to Spock and Scotty and even Bones in his
Yeah.
cameo in an Encounter at Farpoint. And being exposed to these characters, and I've never seen the original. I mean, pop culture wise, about Kirk, Scotty, and Bones and Spock, and those things, but I never actually watched it. So one summer, the USA Network was holding a marathon all week of the original 5 Star Trek films, and it was my first chance. And I came into it midway, and I kind of had to go back, but I started with 2, then worked my way forward, but finally got to go back and watch the original motion picture. And as a kid, found it insanely boring, going, this isn't Star Trek, because I'm used to space battles and Kirk beating people up and, Picard defending his shit. That's what I was used to, So this was a definite different experience. But as I've gotten older and I've been exposed to more types of art, I've found motion picture to be more and more intriguing, and to go, it's different, and I see its technical flaws, but for all of its technical flaws, there is an absolute beauty to it that rivals 2001: A Space Odyssey in terms of science fiction and philosophy. And I loved it. I've loved it ever since. And this time watching it, I was enthralled by it. And of course, we have the 4K up on it. We'll talk about the graphical work and just the beauty and the score and everything in this film. But
can I just jump in real quick? I think it's what you said about 2001 is really important, because one of the things people always talk about, that the reason Paramount made the decision to make the motion picture was really in response to Star Wars. That at the time they were in plans to launch a second series, which was Star Trek Phase 2, and a bunch of the sets and the ideas were all coming from Star Trek Phase 2, which is going to be a new series. It's going to launch a Paramount TV network, which ended up happening much later with Voyager. And but then Star Wars comes out, makes all this money, and Michael Eisner, who's the head of Paramount, I think at the time, goes, well, what do we got? And they go, well, we got Star Trek, and so they make this. But I actually think there is way more connection to 2001: A Space Odyssey than there is to Star Wars. Star Wars is a fantasy adventure. This is a cerebral, slow-paced, a lot of ambiguity in the film, and particularly if you look at the effect sequences from Dalton Trumbo, there's a lot of the same techniques that they used in 2001. It has a lot of connections there. Yeah, sorry. Douglas Trumbo, sorry.
Dalton Trumbo, okay.
Dalton Trumbo did a whole... I'd like to see Dalton Trumbo's Star Trek, by the way. That would be different. But yeah, I think that the lineage with 2001 is really strong.
Absolutely. And there are great examples of the infamous long shots of ships. Like when we first see the Klingon ships, like you could feel it. And even the ubiquitously long shot of the Enterprise in space dock it definitely has a 2001 feel to it.
Going through V'ger and all that stuff. Yeah.
But more than that too, I think the philosophical questions and things that come up in this definitely are reminiscent of 2001. But let's get into the film here. Let's give everyone kind of a breakdown of what happens in this film, and then we'll kind of break it down and talk about it. So this takes place years after Kirk's 5-year mission has finished. Everyone kind of has moved on. Of course, our standard crew, Uhura and Sulu and Chekhov and Scotty, they're all still on the Enterprise. But Bones, Spock, and Kirk have moved on. Kirk has become a Rear Admiral. He's a desk jockey now at Starfleet Command. Spock is busy trying to achieve Kolinar, which is a state of pure logic for Vulcans. It's kind of the height of being Vulcan. And I'm convinced that Bones is off trying to do a Bee Gees cover band. I can't prove that, but I'd like to believe that's what he's doing. But he's retired. But an anomaly, a large anomaly comes along and envelops 3 Klingon warbirds with a brief cameo by Mark Leonard as the Klingon commander. And it's the first time we ever hear formal Klingon language. It's really interesting. 79, this is the birth of the Klingon language. But it gets enveloped, and this freaks everybody out because then it goes to the space Federation space station and engulfs it and all of the people. And this freaks everyone out because it's on a path to Earth. And as is a trope that we will hear in all Star Trek films, the only possible ship that's within range that can go take care of this is the Enterprise. And so the command of the Enterprise right now, while it's in dry dock, is Captain Decker. Is it Willard Decker? Captain Decker. I always mess up his name.
It's Matt.
Matt Decker. It is Willard Decker. Thanks. Captain Decker.
Oh no, you're right. It's Will.
Yeah, Will Decker.
Yeah,
it's Will Decker. Anyway, played by Stephen Collins. He's in command as they're building this up, but Kirk comes up and says, listen, we have a mission. I'm going to take over this ship. This doesn't go well with Decker. And shamefully, Decker is he's demoted temporarily, which I think is a bad rip for Decker. That's not his fault. But he's demoted to XO and science officer. They right off the bat, they lose their Vulcan, what's supposed to be their Vulcan science officer, to a transport accident, who we met for a whole 10 seconds. And he dies. And so we're marred already with this problem. And they get out of space dock. They go to warp, or they try to go to warp, and they end up in a wormhole, like an artificial kind of wormhole thing. And it's done in this kind of slow motion kind
it's the wormhole.
Yeah. But they that's kind of, actually, I'll be honest, probably the most actiony scene that you'll get in this film. But they have to escape the wormhole. They blow up an asteroid which could destroy them, but they make it out and they fix warp drive and get to where this cloud is with everything. We're also introduced to, before they left, the navigator, Lieutenant Ilea, who has a past relationship with Decker. She is a Deltan. She has a very funny line. I love it. We'll talk about her lines later and how kind of in some interest with that. But they make it to the cloud and are trying to get in and are attacked by the cloud. But luckily they get shields up just in time and it doesn't envelop them. They're kind of in a defensive posture, ready to go. And they, you know what? Let's lower shields. Let's just drop everything. And we'll communicate. They communicate this message back to this cloud that they're receiving. They figure it out, and the cloud begins to let them come in. And that's when we start to see the expanse of this cloud and what's here. And it's very, very cerebral, very technological based, lots of blues and purples. But the Enterprise discovers, this huge, I don't even know what to call it other than this huge entity, but it's all technological. As they make their way through, a probe is sent to the ship to evaluate the ship and what it is. And Lieutenant Ilea is seemingly either killed or taken away. We're not sure at that point. They're trying to figure out what's going on. And then shortly later, a few scenes later, there's an intruder alert alarm that happens, and something appears in, I believe, Ilea's quarters, and looks like Lieutenant Ilea, but it's not, and she has a jewel in her head.
She has her dick.
Yeah, the V'ger, which is what this entity is called, V'ger, has sent this probe in the form of Ilea to understand the carbon infestation aboard Enterprise and why they're there. This V'ger cloud thinks that the carbon-based units are infesting Enterprise and causing a problem. And so she's there to gather information. Meanwhile, Spock is really trying to connect with this V'ger cloud. he takes the initiative to go out on his own in an EVA suit, and he makes his way into it and mind melds with the cloud to discover what's going on, and comes to the idea that it's trying to find its creator. It's trying to find where it began, and it's like a child. Now, the V'ger Claw's getting more and more frustrated. It wants information. It wants to know everything. And they're going to destroy the Enterprise. Well, Kirk calls a bluff and says, we're not giving you anything. You can destroy us. You can let us go, or you can destroy, you can destroy, but we're not giving you what you want. And like a child, it says, okay, we'll help you. We'll work through this, basically. And this kind of orifice, everything opens up, and Enterprise is brought in, and they're brought to the center where Kirk, Decker, Spock, Ilea probe, all of them, and Bones go to meet the center of this thing, and they discover that V'ger is actually an Earth-based probe from the 20th century called Voyager 6. And that we sent this probe, and that it was sent through a black hole and encountered a technologically advanced race that is technologically based, and helped to improve it and give it more of its purpose and function, and sent it back to continue to gather information. It's made its way back to Earth to communicate, to meet, to bond with the creator, but the creator is long dead. But Decker figures that if they can key in a final sequence and send that information, the information can be transmitted, and then it will no longer be a threat to Earth or anyone else. But it realizes what they are doing, and it wants to meet the creator, not Decker. So Decker says, everybody, you need to go. I'm going to stay here and merge with V'ger. And part of this is because of his relationship with Ilea. He views Ilea, and so they merge together to create this new life form, this new technological, biological, evolutionary step. Enterprise escapes, everything's okay, and then though with a little bit of abrupt, Kirk says, "Hey, Scotty, let's give this shakedown cruise. Let's go," and that's how the movie ends. And that's just kind of bringing everything together. There's a lot to it because it's a long movie, but those are kind of the major plot points. So let's talk about a little bit about what we really liked about this. And I want to start with the influence of somebody working behind the scenes. And that is acclaimed author and professor Isaac Asimov. If you are a science fiction fan, you know who Isaac Asimov is. And I discovered that Asimov was the science advisor, and he's one of the first credits in the end credit scene that Asimov is in this. So, Steve, I'll go to you. How do you feel about Asimov's influence on everything that we see in motion picture?
Well, the answer is I don't know. I mean, frankly, I've read a lot about the making of it, and while I know that Asimov and Roddenberry were buddies, and they were also buddies with Ray Bradbury, that all these science fiction guys kind of knew each other, I don't know what his actual influence was. And my guess, frankly, is it's pretty small. Now, maybe Brennan, you guys might know more than I know about this, but I don't remember seeing any specific things that I know that he contributed to. I also know that Roddenberry's scripts were being rejected, and there was a massive amount of conflict and difficulty on the set. And that there was one script being written, and then Roddenberry gets it, rewrites the script, and hands his script in, not telling anybody that he did a rewrite. I mean, there's all sorts of weird stuff. So where in there Asimov comes up, I don't know the answer. Do you know more about it than I do?
I actually don't. I would assume that, like most movies,
yeah, no, you're right.
he's credited, but his work is not.
Right.
He gets the credit. That's it.
Yeah, my experience with Asimov is purely off of my major in in college was English, and so I studied Asimov a little bit because sci-fi nerd,
Sure.
And Asimov stuff is very interesting. But he's also known as kind of the father of modern robotics, the Three Laws, movies like The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's influenced by Asimov. And so when we're dealing with basically an artificial intelligence, and this idea of artificial intelligence and this ascension into a new form of consciousness, which is something, Brennan, you and I have talked about with Commander Data.
transcendence. Yeah.
Absolutely. I can't help but think that even if maybe not in the filmmaking process, but maybe as if they were buddies, that him and Roddenberry were hanging out, that some of that idea of artificial intelligence and the growth and evolution of what is sentience can't be ignored here with Next Generation and what Decker did with the V'ger probe.
I think that's totally fair. I also think what's so weird about this is it's hard to talk about motion picture without talking about the episode of the original series, The Changeling.
Yeah.
And it's like, now everything I've read is that everybody working on motion picture says, hey, we didn't even think about the Changeling. It wasn't in our head. We totally forgot about it.
Huh.
But if you look at it, you know, that's an episode where they discover this super powerful alien probe that's heading towards Earth that is looking for its creator, that we later discover
was augmented by aliens.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Plot-wise, it's all the same. So a lot of the ideas that you're talking about that are definitely connected to Asimov and robotics and artificial intelligence, those are ideas that they were dealing with repeatedly in the original series.
Yeah, it's true. And also, of course, Kirk talking down a computer.
It's one of his best moves.
It's like, oh my word. But yeah, the Changeling, the Nomad probe, it's so similar to V'ger that it can't be a coincidence in my mind.
It's somebody must have known. I mean, people didn't. No one. As you said at the very beginning, Chris. No one. This had never happened before. No one had taken a TV show that had been canceled after 3 seasons and then made a major motion picture out of it.
Yeah.
No one poured over episodes of Bonanza or Father Knows Best for every single detail for every single episode, like we do with Star Trek. You know, people didn't treat the media like that. So it is possible that maybe they weren't aware of the Changeling like I was. But I know when I saw it that I recognized at 10 years old the similarity.
Yeah, and it's funny because I had not seen the Changeling when I saw both the picture, but as soon as I saw the Changeling, I went, like, oh yeah, it basically it's the same thing.
It's really similar.
Okay. Steve, why don't you give me something from this film that you really liked, something you want to highlight?
Well, I think the first thing I would have to say is I personally think that this might very well be the most beautiful Star Trek movie. I think, and it's funny, watching that 4K new transfer, the amount, and I think the movie cost like $40 million. This is more expensive than The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a hugely expensive film, and those special effects sequences, almost all of which go on far, far too long, are stunning. They are absolutely spectacular. I, as an editor, would cut them down, way down. But that doesn't mean I don't think it's beautiful. So that's my first comment. Is I think this is a beautiful looking film.
I agree with you 100%. I'm a big fan of classic matte painting, and there are spots that you can tell the hard work that some of these painters, I mean, the V'ger cloud itself, just on the outside, the layers that are through there when you look at it in 4K are amazing.
The journey through V'ger is so
and a lot of that, I know that's a mix of a lot of things, but those matte painters were working hard on this.
All pre-CG, which I mean,
and it's a lost art.
There's
not enough matte painting done today. It was just like, we'll do it all in CG post.
I agree.
It's a lost art that is amazing, and this really exemplifies the work that those artists put into it.
Yeah,
totally.
Brendan, what about you?
Well, we got to highlight Sid Mead, who was the conceptual designer of the look of the film. It got to highlight him for its look. What I really like about this film is the idea that V'ger is analogous to Captain Kirk. And this is something that Scott Nance talked about on the Cinephile episode on this film. Is that V'ger starts out like Spock. like we see Spock at the beginning of this film. Very, like, no emotion, very robotic. But like the journey that Spock has been on throughout the series, V'ger, as we learn through the mind meld, is cold and empty because it's learned so much, yet it asks itself, is this all there is?
Mhm.
And so, in a way, Kirk himself is basically Spock and Bones. Spock is all logic, Bones is all emotion. You put them together, you get Kirk. I think V'ger is on a similar journey. And I find that idea that it wants to be more utterly fascinating.
Mhm.
And Kirk is a jerk in this one.
A little
Well,
bit.
that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah,
I mean, I think the what's interesting to me is that thematically, this is right in Star Trek. You know, and in particular, I would say in terms of the character of Spock, which I think the more I think about it, and the more doing the original series so with Scott, I've gone. Kirk is the hero. Spock is the central. Not only is Spock the central figure of the original series, but I think Spock is the most important character in all of Star Trek. Period.
I agree.
And that the essential themes between emotion and logic and what it means to be human and what it means to everything going from artificial intelligence and what is a soul and identity and all of that stuff, it all sits with Spock. And the fact that Spock, who grew in the course of the original series until his friendship with Kirk was really solidified, and he even revealed his emotions about Kirk to some degree at various points, that at the beginning of this movie, he has decided to throw all that away. You know, in The Naked Time, Spock says to Kirk, you know, when he's affected by the disease or whatever, when I feel friendship for you, I feel ashamed. And that is such a powerful statement. And now, even after his 5-year mission with Kirk and developing these friendships, he said, no, I'm going to be a Vulcan. I'm going to knock all that out. I'm going to abandon the human side of myself. I'm going to become purely logical. And yet he fails. And it is his interaction with V'ger that makes him go, who is also trapped in this purely logical state, who is also not in touch with that human side, who is also sinking. And he goes, oh, and I think Spock's conclusion, and this is why, if you're asking the other thing that I love, it is the scene with Spock waking up after his mind meld with V'ger.
Yes.
Talking to Kirk, because he realizes, oh, this thing I've been trying to hold down, this thing I've been rejecting my entire I am, and hugely important, and that you could find a balance between those things. That thematically is hooked up through the entire movie. I wish the movie worked better, but it doesn't. Like there are elements of it that don't deliver on all of this, but thematically it is so right in the sweet spot for Star Trek.
Absolutely. And the theme is something that I enjoy in general, because this idea of existentialism and who are we and where do we come from and what makes us is so typical Star Trek. It really is. I mean, I can't count the number of Commander Data episodes that deal with, in minute ways, those questions, you know, and even into 7 of 9 and her quest for individuality. That in and of itself is an extension of these same concepts. And if that is not an analogy to what Star Trek is all about, I don't know what is. I mean, what does it say when it opens up? To boldly go where no one has gone before. Isn't that what we're doing? Even when we're searching within ourselves, we're trying to go to places that we've never been before. And it's all about finding yourself. And in that, this movie is so good at it. It just, it takes its sweet time getting there. And while it's pretty to look at, it's long. You know, and the acting is fine. It's fine. It's Star Trek acting. It's fine.
I think Kirk's character development's pretty good.
This is the start of some interesting things that we don't really get resolved until later down the line. this idea of you want the ship back. You left though. This is my ship now. And poor Decker, I really feel bad for Decker.
I do too. I think Kirk's terrible. He's terrible with him.
Absolutely. He's rude and crude. And when you watch him, it's such a big difference, the Kirk now to the Kirk that was on the bridge. I remember the Kirk on the bridge where he would tell a joke, or maybe something at Spock's, Spock's
expense.
Thank you. His expense. I was looking for the word. But this is a guy who could also take charge, and everyone trusted him, and him as a rear admiral, he's now just, I'm doing this, I'm gonna do this. There's no heart there anymore. And I think you're right, he's trying to find it again, and he doesn't find it until he's relieved through being punished in Star Trek 4, and given the same job that he should have stayed with in the first place.
I think there's real problems with the way Kirk is portrayed in this film. I understand what they were trying to go for. It's so funny. Again, I'm in the midst of having really studied episode by episode the original series.
Yeah.
And Kirk, when it's well written, he is a subtle character. He is quite brilliant. He's an incredible observer. He is an amazing, so I teach directing in film school, and I've been a director. And so leadership is the thing I think about all the time. And again, where did I get my ideas of how a leader behaves? It behaves from Kirk, who is so good at working with all the people in the really good episodes. That leadership skill is gone in this episode. The way he treats Decker is terrible, and he's foolish in what he does because he doesn't acknowledge he doesn't know the ship. He's arrogant. Yeah, there's real problems I think in the way they deal with him.
One of these days I would love to do a list of poor Star Trek admirals, and I hate to say it,
most of them.
I would add Kirk to this list.
Yeah,
Admiral Kirk in this film, I would add to this list, because all the choices that he's making and pushing Decker aside the way that he does, he ruins any possibility of succeeding in this mission. Now, of course, they do in the end, but don't you think they would have done a lot better if he would have just listened to Decker in the first place? The wormhole thing never would have happened. There are things that could have been fixed really quickly, listen to Decker. But instead you get this attitude, this not charisma that I'm not used to with Kirk. And this is not the Kirk that I love. And I guess this kind of starts to lead us into what we didn't like about this film. It really does. And you're right. Kirk's persona in this, while it fits for Star Trek admirals, it is not the Kirk that we love.
So I think it's all the things that aren't there are the things that I like the least, if that makes any sense. It's not that there is a whole bunch of stuff that is there that could be trimmed down. Mostly these long, if I was to go in and just do some cutting, I could easily cut 20 minutes without even a sweat, you know? But the things that are missing is like, okay, Decker is in love with Ilea. And by the way, because phase 1 was being established when those characters were created, Will Decker and Ilea are Riker and Troy.
Yep.
That is what they were going to be. They're very, very similar ideas. Exactly. But okay, he's in love with her. She gets killed. There's no moment of mourning. There's no moment of thinking about what that means to him. And then she comes back, and we're not, the idea that, oh, the person I love is inside you somewhere and I have to bring it out. That's a really interesting idea, but they don't really deal with it that much. There's so many little things like that with Kirk, with Spock and their relationship. I wish there was a scene with Spock and McCoy, just the two of them together. I think it would have really helped the show. There's so many things that aren't there. That's the stuff that I like the least.
Yeah, I agree.
There are more aesthetic things that I don't like.
Ooh,
the uniforms.
I hate the uniforms. Agreed. I hate them.
Oh my word, the uniforms are terrible.
God. And I know again, I've seen some of the designs for phase 2. I know some of that was from the ideas of phase 2.
They look like pajamas is what they look like.
Yeah, I just don't get them. I don't understand it, and it doesn't make sense, and I can't read them, and
And the beige upholstery. Ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
in the rec room. Oy, oy, oy.
Absolutely. And then I guess, yeah, you've made mention to it. The pacing and the editing of this film
Mm.
is just, it's too long. And again, they call it the slow motion picture for a reason. It drags, it really does, and it needs help. And I agree with you. You could probably cut a good 20 minutes out overall, and you wouldn't miss a thing. You could do all the same beats.
It's
Yep.
very odd to me that this film is as boring as it is when it's directed by Robert Wise. West Side Story, Sound of Music.
I mean, the guy cut Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you know, that's a pretty, well, and that's what's weird to me. It's not just that he's the director, he's an editor.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, he's one of the great editors of all time. And I agree. But again, what I've heard about production, they were literally editing and redoing things the night before it premiered. I mean, they were under such time pressure. I know Robert Wise was never happy with the cut. You know, I just think there were all these cooks. I just think there was chaos.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah.
You know, one thing, well, a combination of things that we skip for things that we like, because I like, is sound, and of course the Jerry Goldsmith.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, yes.
Now, so Steve, I assume when you think of the Star Trek theme, you think of the classic. Ooh.
Of course.
Yeah,
Alexander Courage. Yeah.
See, now for me, being of my age, TNG comes to mind. Dun, da, 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 and we get that with this film. This is the creation of the I call it the TNG march. Of course, TNG actually just took it and sped it up and rearranged it slightly, but the essential elements are there. And the work of Jerry Goldsmith cannot be discounted in this film, to giving it the brevity and gravity that it needs, despite the long shots and the poor editing that's in this. That score at least makes you feel the tension that's going on.
I agree. I think it's a great score.
The Klingon theme that he writes is really good too.
And the sound effects. I love the sound effects in this.
Oh.
So good.
It was Christopher Nolan before it was Christopher Nolan.
One of them, the only thing it sounds like to me is it's I call it when V'ger's talking, but it's that down sound. Sounds like they're hitting a piano wire.
So there's a little bit of trivia about that. Do you know the trivia about that sound?
I don't. I'm curious.
So that sound is designed by a musician. I forget the name of the instrument. It's a huge instrument. It's like a 15-foot string instrument that this guy designed.
That's right. You mentioned that.
This guy, well, I got this from Scott Mantz. I didn't know this piece of information, but this guy was a child actor, and he played Kirk's nephew in Operation Annihilate, who's almost dying, and then later on plays Tommy in what is the worst episode of the original series, in my opinion, which is And the Children Shall Lead. Ooh. That actor in 2 episodes of Star Trek is the guy who created that wow sound.
Yeah,
that's him.
I love it. Again, it's ominous, it's foreboding, but it's alien. It sounds so alien, and I adore this. And
makes you wonder if Hans Zimmer listened to that when he came up with the Inception.
Oh, I bet.
Absolutely.
Maybe even hired that guy. Who knows? Although Hans at this point is it's almost all synth.
Yeah.
Now, how do we? Obviously, we've talked about Kirk and how he's portrayed. How do we feel about the acting rest of this cast?
Oh, go ahead, Brennan. Sorry.
Persis Kambata, I'm not the biggest fan of her acting. As Ilea, I think she's kind of might be the weakest. That's the only one I can really point out as not liking. Yeah.
I think everyone is pretty good. I'm really happy when D. Kelly shows up. I think it's nice to get some humor that wasn't there at first. I kind of agree with you about Ilea, but
me.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of agree about Ilea, but I think a lot of it is the script.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And everyone else is fine. I mean, it's rough to be Uhura and Sulu and Chekhov, because sometimes you only get a few lines, and they're all okay. Decker's good. Another thing, by the way, the trivia that he's actually the son of the guy from the Doomsday Machine of Commodore
Matt
Decker.
Commodore Decker, yeah.
That's where the Matt came from. That's another thing where, man, that would have been really cool if you actually said that and dealt with that in the episode. It would be more interesting.
I knew your father, something like that.
Well, and your dad died when there was a giant creature coming towards Earth, and he sacrificed his life to save the system, and now we're facing this giant creature coming towards Earth. I mean, there's a lot of emotional stuff you could have gotten out of it, but they didn't.
Yeah. Brennan and I talk about, frequently when we have character-centric episodes, how oftentimes other characters that we love are forgotten about. They're not looked at. They have a brief, and unfortunately for me, this is what happens to Sulu and Chekhov and Uhura and even Scotty. Like, they kind of get pushed aside to focus on Kirk, Spock, and Bones has some good lines in here, but even Bones doesn't get as much.
It's really a Kirk, Spock, Decker movie.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, and so and for that, and maybe that's to the writing. I'm sure not necessarily the acting, but it doesn't do any favors for the actors.
Yeah,
it's kind of sad, unfortunately. But now for my favorite part of the show. How this connects and affects the Trek world in general, Trek in the larger picture. And I can't help but think of this in the back of writers' minds in season 2. And I know a lot of the story of the Borg, but the story of V'ger and this technologically advanced species and trying to find itself, I can't help but think of the Borg.
Well, that's the great is that conspiracy idea, which or retconning or whatever of the planet that V'ger found himself that rebuilt him was the Borg planet.
Interesting.
Now, of course, they weren't thinking that because none of that stuff existed.
No.
But definitely, that's ideas that I think go forward. To me, the biggest influence is not creative, it's not aesthetic, it's not artistic. They're going to reject the aesthetics of this episode entirely. They're going to cut the budgets way down because Star Trek 2 was made by the TV unit rather than the motion picture unit. It looks totally different. But what is important is that without the motion picture, there is no more Star Trek. That's it. If the motion picture doesn't make money, which despite its huge budget, it still made money, and they went to make Wrath of Khan, and Wrath of Khan is a huge success, there's no Next Generation. None of this happens without the motion picture.
I know,
and if they don't kind of blunder with this film, as Steve says, it doesn't give them a chance to course correct.
Exactly.
With the next film. So.
I know what was interesting too. I know the story of Roddenberry behind the scenes during this time, and that the studio was not a fan of the money that Roddenberry was pushing into it and what they were getting out of it. They weren't exactly happy with that. And there was a lot in terms of producer, things like that. So for the second film, Roddenberry is made an executive producer, but is not given the full artistic license and creativity that he had before. And because of, I guess you're right, what has happened here, we get some really awesome Star Trek movies. And I love motion picture, but I would be hard pressed to say that Wrath of Khan and future Star Trek films aren't amazing. And a lot of that is due to the work that Roddenberry did. Whether it was good or bad is irrelevant. The work he did, you're absolutely right, contributes to creating some amazing art down the line.
I mean, I think in general, Roddenberry's one of those difficult people, and we all got to be grateful. We love Star Trek and that he created it, and over and over, many of the great ideas, and that comes from Roddenberry. And he messed up Star Trek more than anybody else, in my opinion. And I'm real happy that he had no influence on Wrath of Khan. I know he wasn't happy about it, but Wrath of Khan is, many people would agree, and I definitely think, the finest Star Trek film so far. And if Roddenberry and I personally, I know you love Next Generation, I love it too, but I think the first 2 seasons of Next Generation are fairly terrible.
I agree.
Well, I agree with
you.
And that's Roddenberry.
It was trying too hard to be original series.
With
You know,
too
Oh,
much
I don't think it was
Roddenberry.
trying. No, we'll have a whole argument about that. I don't think it's trying at all.
I'm sure I'd love to have you back at some point, but with those
It's
first
too
two
much
seasons,
Roddenberry. Is what
with those
it is.
first two seasons, I definitely see it in the design choices. I see it in the story choices. I see a lot of that because it reminds me a lot of original series in its form. Some of the themes and things have advanced and grown, but it still feels like an extension of that instead of being its own thing. And that's not always a great thing, in my opinion. You want to grow and advance, and it still felt like, in ways, it was made that 20 years before.
Yeah, I mean the big thing. So, have you read the 50-Year Mission, which is one of the listening to, because I just re-listened to some of it about the early years of Next Generation. Roddenberry insisted no conflict.
Yeah.
That was his rule. No conflict.
Yeah, we've grown beyond that.
It's like, I won't swear, but that's BS. All of drama is based on conflict. You might think that the Federation has grown beyond it, but all of drama is based on conflict. And you clearly didn't watch the original series, because Kirk, Spock, and McCoy arguing is the heart of the original series.
Yep.
Yes.
And so having all these characters in Next Generation who are all just everything's great, like, sucks. It ruins drama.
And thank goodness for season 3 of Next Gen.
Yeah.
And it's really ironic you're saying that, because there is so much drama and conflict between Kirk and Decker in this.
Right.
They're at each other all the time.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
And that at least made it interesting, though. At least there was a character dynamic there that I understood. I got what was going on, and that dynamic I like. It's amazing. But also I think when we're talking about the greater picture, there's the little things. I love to look at the little things. Klingon language, I adore it. This is born here. Mark Leonard Mark Leonard. Actually, apparently Mark Leonard had a hand in Klingon language too. That was part of it.
Interesting.
Yeah. Pretty cool. As a matter of fact, I had a audio CD of how to speak Klingon language, and for Next Generation, one of the actors that helped solidify Klingon language was Michael Dorn. He took the basics of what they had, and they had a lot, but helped expand that and really grew with that. And I really like that down the line. But Mark Leonard is a lot of where that starts, and it's pretty impressive. And of course, the design of the Klingons.
Which apparently keeps changing.
Yeah, I don't think they can make up their mind what they want to do.
I think the change into the motion picture and into Next Generation was really interesting, and the way it was refined over the years is cool. When the change in Discovery, I just don't get. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah.
I went with it, but you're right. I didn't understand it, but I was just like, all right, I'm gonna go with it. Yeah, I mean, so overall, I mean, you made the main point, and that is, without this film, we don't get Star Trek. We don't get the golden age of Star Trek right now, where we're enjoying Strange New Worlds and Discovery and Prodigy. It's so much going on right now, and stories being told. You don't get this. It ends after its first 5-year mission, and that's pretty sad. Give me, each of you, and Brendan, we'll start with you. Your absolute favorite moment in this movie.
My favorite moment is, I believe that for me, I just love it because it's the actual, like, only funny moment. It's when Bones comes on the Enterprise.
Now, just a minute there.
I mentioned it before. It's Spock in sickbay holding Kirk's hand and saying, "This simple touch is something V'ger cannot understand."
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
I get a chuckle, and I just love it every time when Ilea says, "My oath of celibacy is on record." Like, I see what you're doing there to Kirk. I understand. We know he's a bit of a playboy. We know.
Well, I think that's a really, but that totally goes on the list of things where, man, I wish we had more about this. Like, the implication seems to be that Deltans have a super powerful effect on men, and that they have an oath of celibacy for a reason, that it's on record, it's illegally. Well,
they drive people crazy with their.
Well, let's explore that. Let's have Chekhov walking down the corridor and run into Ilea, and then have Decker there. or have Kirk have a moment with Ilia where he's uncomfortable, and have Decker. I mean, if we want this conflict between Kirk and Decker, well, Ilia could be a source of that conflict and make it even worse. Like we never. She has that line, and then it's never visited again.
Yeah, it came out as a comedy, kind of a comedy thing, and understanding the stereotype that Kirk was the playboy and always got the girl, and it came off more funny to me than anything else. But you're right, with the right development, it could. I think the closest thing we ever get to something like that is in Voyager, when I remember the episode after Seven finally went with it, wasn't trying to escape, and Harry Kim thought she was attracted, or he was attracted to her. And there was just this weird kind of back and forth that was going on. Like, I don't get it.
Like, don't worry, I won't hurt you.
Yeah, this kind of reminded me of that in a little bit of a way when you said that. But yeah, overall, what's our final thoughts of this film? Steve, I want to start with you.
It's actually, Chris, what you said a while ago. I like it. As a kid, I loved it. And then as I grew older, I went, man, this movie really is pretty slow and boring, and it doesn't quite work for me. And Wrath of Khan is so good. And then as I've grown older, it's gone up in the ranks. I like it quite a bit more than a lot of the others. And so I think I don't think it's a total success. I do think there's major problems with it, but I think it is a fascinating, not perfect film. That's what I think.
Absolutely. Brennan?
I have come to love this film more and more. Thanks in part to the cinephiles. I have to give a shout out there. And I think I really do like what this film is trying to do, even if it doesn't quite achieve it.
Right. I've reviewed this film in the past, and I said before that I really feel that this is something that Trek fans would love, and if you weren't a Trek fan, you might not be with this. But as I've come along, as I've gotten older and learned more techniques of criticism and looking at things from different lenses, I definitely think that overall, this is a good example of science fiction just done. It's great science fiction that needs help. There is a great science fiction film hidden under here, a great one. And it comes out in the end being a very serviceable to good science fiction film because of its problems. But underneath all that, if you can look beyond that, this is a great science fiction film. It just unfortunately had the hands of man on it. Maybe an artificial intelligence could have fixed that. I don't know.
It's a good idea.
Hey, with technology these days, put people in a room or put enough computers going. I'd like to see what Star Trek film they would come up with. Yeah. So with that, next week, we are back to the randomizer, and the randomizer has blessed us. The randomizer chose to be our friend this week because next week we are going back to the original series, season 1, episode 22, Khan and Space Seed.
Nice.
Yes. The randomizer's been cruel to us a few times, so this is nice. But Steve, I want to give you a chance here. Thank you so much for joining us, and your input on Star Trek really is valuable. Where can the people find you?
Well, first of all, it was a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was nice to revisit this movie, particularly in the 4K presentation. They can, first of all, find me on Twitter at SR Morris. They can find the Cinephiles, CINE-FILES. We have now done that show for 6 years. And in 6 years, we have covered films, everything from Citizen Kane and Lawrence of Arabia to Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton films to The Big Lebowski, Star Wars, The Princess Bride, Apocalypse Now. We do each year the whole deep dive into a director. So we've done Akira Kurosawa, Orson Welles, we've done Akira Kurosawa, Orson Welles, Hitchcock, and we just did Coppola last year in the Godfather films, and this year Spike Lee. So check out the Cinephiles, and as we've talked about, Enterprise Incidents is we're going episode by episode through the original series, and I think after you guys do your Space Seed episode, I think everyone should listen to that and go back and listen to our Space Seed episode, because you can never have enough Space Seed. That's my opinion.
Brennan, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Brennan Mystical. Once the SCL starts again, you can follow me there. You can follow us here at Random Trek and Page Turners They Were Not My Star Wars podcast, and with all the various other social groups that I'm a part of.
And you can find me on Twitter, on Twitch at Ingle1984. You can also find me hanging out in the Patreons of many Schmodown competitors, such as Video Drew, Mark Riley, Ben Bateman, lots of different people. Check that out on YouTube. And of course, you can find me here every week with Brennan here on Page Turners That Were Not in Random Trek. And as always, we end every episode, Qapla' and live long and prosper.
Peace and long life.